Rob, a closer one than I expected against the Tennessee Titans. Still a win, which is the most important thing. What was your biggest takeaway in a win that was not dominant, no style points, and maybe not especially interesting to the rest of the NFL? But what was sticking with you after this one?
I think really just that they got the job done. We've seen so many teams this year fall foul of the trap game thing, and they did not go down that road at all. That's sort of the positive outlook on it. I suppose the slightly negative outlook on it is that there's been a few games now. You think to the Arizona game on the road, you think to the Houston Texans game, this one as well, where they could have blown the opponent away and won by 15, 20 points. And in the end, they've needed an onside kick to secure the victory. And if they give up the onside kick, then we're all stressing that they can hold on and not actually lose that game to what was effectively the worst team in the NFL going into the weekend. So that's the one thing. I think perhaps they need to still find a way to just finish these things off and not let it get as close as it did. But we're at that stage in the year where they've just got to get the job done. The Niners won, the Rams won, you had to win, they did win, and we move on to next week.
It's funny you mentioned that onside kick. I almost forgot about it because I was not stressed at all during this game. I'm like, yeah, they're not playing their best, but the Titans didn't really do anything to really scare me. But Cam Ward did have a good day. What'd you make of the linebacker play? You know, you're missing Tyrese Knight, you're missing Ernest Jones, Patty O'Connell was in there, Drake Thomas. Just speak on the LBs.
Well, they were hitting. You know, that you could certainly hear some of those hits that they were delivering through the TV screen. And I think that's what you want to see. It's quite hard, actually, to sort of watch college linebackers these days. You know, when you're kind of watching the college football, there are not those explosive jump-off-the-screen linebackers, aside from the guy at Ohio State who might be the first overall pick. So it's difficult to identify. If you were sort of go through and say, who could the Seahawks draft this year to add a bit of depth at linebacker, it's one of the harder positions to analyze. So the fact that they've been able to find some players to provide a bit of depth and that they can help you get a job done here, I think is very, very reassuring. I think the defense generally maybe just took a step back because of some of the absentees that they've had. They maybe felt that a little bit more in this game than they have in recent weeks. But Ernest Jones is hopefully going to come back and be fully healthy. Hopefully Tyrese Knight will. Hopefully Julian Love will. And I think for 1 week or maybe 2 weeks, if it has to be next week as well, they stepped up to the plate. They hit hard. They drove those Tennessee Titans players backwards, which is what you want to see from the position. And they helped get the job done on the day.
Definitely getting the job done. In fact, 6 weeks ahead of schedule was Jackson Smith-Njigba, who set a new single-season receiving yards franchise record. DK Metcalf, the previous record holder in 2018, 1303. Jackson, with 6 games left to play, is now above that. You obviously study a lot of these guys as they're drafted. Jackson, a first-round pick out of Ohio State, Bump, basically like a wide receiver right now. So it's hard to say, oh, you couldn't expect a great, NFL career out of him. But how does what you're seeing right now compare to what your expectations were for his NFL career?
Well, we should all be very grateful for what happened in his final year at Ohio State. If we cast our minds back, he barely played. Like, he did not play much at all in that final season. And if he had played a full season and put up huge numbers, then he wouldn't have lasted to the 20th pick. And that has just created this perfect storm where people were perhaps a little bit put off by the injury history on that final season. Testing wise, he was never going to come out and run a 4.35 or anything like that. And it's played into Seattle's advantage. And you've done what you always want to do with the first round. You want to draft a player who can go on to become one of the best players at his position in the league. Jackson Smith-Njigba, we've talked about it before. If you were to list like the 10 best performers in the NFL this year, without a shadow of a doubt, he has to be in that 10. In fact, I think I've been arguing a little bit this week. I think he's getting some attention, but maybe not enough compared to some other players. Like George Pickens there was a debate yesterday about whether he's the best receiver in the league. George Pickens is having a great year. Jackson Smith-Njigba is having a record-breaking year. Like, it is about time that he was acknowledged as legitimately one of the best players in the NFL. And he's just such a natural talent. It's not a 6'4" receiver. He's not a 4.35 runner. He's just naturally talented, very gifted, tracks the ball in the air, amazingly gets open. He can do everything. He can beat you short. He can get downfield. It's great that the Seahawks have him. He's a legit blue chip player. You need 4 or 5 of those to win a Super Bowl. I suppose the question is whether the Seahawks have 4 or 5 or whether they just have 2 or 3 at this time to take them all away. But Jackson Smith-Njigba is a building block, and he's going to be paid, I imagine, in the offseason, an enormous contract to make sure that he stays in Seattle.
K9 has 71 yards, right? He's had games where he had 100 yards against Pitt, I believe like 86 against Arizona. But this felt like his best game to me just because of the way he was running, his style, getting downhill. I feel like they're close to unlocking K9. What say you?
I think they're getting closer. It's interesting that a lot of his explosive runs, I think all of his explosive runs were through the middle. So he wasn't bouncing anything outside. It wasn't outside zone that he was getting those explosive runs. It was through the middle. It still feels to me like something's not quite there. Like Ken Walker we're talking about blue chip players. Ken Walker has got the talent to be a blue chip player. He can be to the running game what Jackson Smith-Njigba is to the passing game. So I'm just wondering why it hasn't happened. In 4 years, why has he not been able to elevate himself to become that dominant running back? Because he's got everything. He's got the size, explosive, he's fast. There's everything there. And yes, he is. It shouldn't really be baby steps progress with him at this point. They still seem a little bit unsure as to, we're just going to give him all of the workload compared to sort of bringing Zach Charbonnet and previously George Alani into it. I don't know if that's just deliberate, that they're going to have a rotation throughout and it's going to be part of their mindset, whoever's on the roster. But I'd quite like to, if they're going to go with him and they want him to be the best, and if they see him as part of the long-term plan in Seattle, I'd like to see him get 20 carries in a game and just sort of say, we're going to go with him and we're going to see what he can do. And there are still some times where he just feels a little bit hesitant. Like there were a couple of runs where defenders got into the backfield really quickly and he senses that. And I think in his head, he's thinking, do I bounce? Do I stick with this? What do I do? Just get your head down, man. Just try and get a yard or two on this. He's getting hit in the backfield. I'd still like to see that aspect of his play, but he is such a tremendous talent. And those explosive runs did come on the inside, not bouncing outside. So hopefully that is a sign of things to come, because if they're going to get far in the playoffs, they've got a very good defense. They're going to need a really good running game as well.
So I was going to ask you maybe what you just answered, but let's expound on it a little bit, because I was thinking, Rob, given Mike Macdonald and Kubiak's commitment to the run and given Ken Walker's talent, I want to leave room for it to improve. But sometimes when it's like you're through 12 weeks in a season, your team kind of is what they are, barring this team getting healthier. Julian Love coming back would add a boost that your defense could always use, right? It's already elite, but there are ways that you can take a step forward, but we kind of know who the Seahawks are for 2025 right now. Is that good enough to win a Super Bowl?
I think there are other teams that I would rank ahead of Seattle in the race to win a Super Bowl. And it's a weird NFL season. Like the Chiefs were nearly 5-6, probably should be 5-6. The Bills lost again. The Buccaneers have completely fallen away. There are lots of other things that you could talk about there. And the Seahawks are definitely, without a shadow of a doubt, one of the best teams in the NFL, and they have a chance. But when you get to the playoffs, you are going to have to, if you're a wild card team, you're going to have to win 3 games to get to the Super Bowl. And this team so far they've not won any of the 3 big games against the Niners, the Bucs, and the Rams. So I think we need to see them win one of those. The Rams game coming up, obviously, is a good example of that, before we can say, I genuinely want to rank this team ahead of, let's say, the Rams, who have a Super Bowl winning head coach and quarterback, who have beaten the Niners this season, who have trounced the Bucs, have beaten you, yes, not at their absolute sparkling best, but they did still win that game against the Seahawks last week. So I still think there is a little bit of a point to prove. And then the other thing I would say is there are so many ingredients there for the Seahawks to go on a Super Bowl run. But the way that those they get ahead in games and they allow opponents back into it, are they short of a finisher? Is that something that maybe they go and acquire in the offseason? In 2012, they kind of needed that. They go and get Bennett and Averill. Do they need to go and do something like that this offseason to really feel like they're a Super Bowl favorite in the NFC? And the other thing is still the giveaways. You are going to have to improve that. I know that it was a little bit better at the weekend. Sam Darnold still had at least a couple of throws where you're thinking he's quite lucky not to be intercepted there. And if it comes down to trust between Do I trust Matt Stafford to have a clean game and win a playoff game? The answer is yes. Jalen Hurts and the Eagles had a complete collapse. We had that game as our game in the UK at the weekend. They didn't score a point in the second half. He's thrown one interception all season. He's not turning the ball over. Do I trust Sam Darnold in 3 playoff games to not turn the ball over? At the moment, I don't. Still believe in him as a quarterback, but until he gets to that point and does it, you have to say maybe there's 1 or 2 other teams that I would put ahead of Seattle at this stage.
There's been some movement, on the offensive line. We saw Olu play. Haynes got some time. What's your evaluation of the line as it stands today?
Well, first of all, Gray Zabel is just a machine. How did we go from sort of going to bed the week before dreading the worst with Gray Zabel? Like, oh, he's got a bad knee injury. We'll see you at training camp, Gray.
Yeah.
You know, to, he goes out there and plays a full game against the Titans. I got to take my hat off to him. Like, that's really impressive. I think the line, the problem with the modern day NFL is that anyone can go on this all 22 now. Anyone can find the snap where the player makes a mistake, or the 2 or 3 snaps where a player makes a mistake, and then they can put it online and say, this guy stinks. And it's very rare that you get a sort of balanced outlook of watching the whole game and seeing how a player has performed. And Anthony Bradford gets a finger pointed at him. There are definitely some mistakes on tape, but there's also some good moments, and there were some good moments of the weekend. Oluwatimi, I don't think anyone's going to mistake him for Creed Humphrey anytime soon, but by and large, you didn't notice the center at the weekend. That's a good thing. That's kind of what you want from your center. I think the overall play of the offensive line is so far ahead of where it was 12 months ago that it's still the story of the season for me. Like, we talk about Darnold, we talk about the defense, we talk about Jackson Smith and Jigba. The line was a shambles last year, and it's way ahead of where it was. And I'm looking forward so much to another year with this coaching staff, working with this group, potentially another draft where there are some interesting players that they could add competition in there. There's 1 or 2 interesting possible free agents that are going to hit the market that you could add to the mix as well. I just keep thinking, how good's this line going to look in 12 months when it's had another year of seasoning?
It could be a related question, but when you look kind of big picture at the team as a whole, what's impressed you most about what the Mike Macdonald regime has been able to do in 2 seasons?
It's just totally, for me, it's night and day to where it was when you look back at that 2023 season. Like, there's no team like the Steelers with Mason Rudolph at quarterback coming into Seattle and just running down your throat for 200 yards and you can do nothing about it and you can't tackle. The Seahawks had become, in their structure, had become quite finesse and frustrating to watch, and the complete contradiction of everything they said they wanted to be. And now when you watch this team, that's totally different. You know, they are far more physical in the trenches. The defensive line, we've talked about the defensive line, it's probably the most physical defensive line in the NFL. You know, you can hang your hat on that defensive line to potentially win you a big game. The culture of everything seems to be connected. You know, the players, seeing Ernest Jones come out and defend the quarterback, seeing the way that the players are with each other on that side, it just feels like he's brought everybody together, and the mindset shift. And Pete Carroll did such a good job for a long time. It's quite hard to follow that. Like, there are so many legendary coaches who depart. Look at what happened when Bill Belichick left. The replacement lasted a year. Like, it's quite hard to be the guy who follows the legend, and to have turned it around and created this team in his identity and his vision within a season and a half is mightily impressive. And I think to go from feeling at the end of 2023, this team is not close. They're kind of stuck in the middle ground. They're stuck in that place you never really want to be, to now feeling like they could have an interesting playoff run. And if it's not this year, next year, they could be one of the favorites to win the Super Bowl. I think that does not get enough credit, frankly. And I can't wait to see where this team goes next, because the direction is forward momentum, bright future, and I think it's a very exciting time to be a Seahawks fan.
He is Seahawks Draft Log's Rob Staten, kind enough to join us. Rob, we thank you so much for your time. And I think you're right in highlighting some of the areas we want to watch to see if this team improves. We will keep our eyes trained on Ken Walker on some of those takeaways and hope that we can see some stuff we love against the Minnesota Vikings. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Rob.
Thanks. Have a great Thanksgiving, everybody.
Bye.